We think we are entitled to the weekend, to the holidays, to the idea that we work for just 8 hours and the rest of the day is ours. We know that children must be in the classroom and not at work during their childhood, that to make a child labor through the years that should be theirs would be an abuse of that child. We treat all of it as ours by right, as fixed as the calendar, as old as time itself. But it has not always been like this, not even close. To rest on Saturdays was once a crime. The idea that you stop working after 8 hours was once considered a radical threat to society. For most of history, there was no weekend, no 8-hour day, no holidays worth the name, no childhood free of labor. The working day had no ceiling, and your time belonged to whoever paid for it, your employer, from the moment you could stand until the moment your body gave out. Everything you now assume is yours by right was, not so long ago, unthinkable, an abomination to even speak of. And the distance between that world and this one was not closed by the kindness of employers or the natural progress of history. It was fought for, closed by ordinary people, people with no wealth, no power, and no permission, who organized and marched and, in some cases, died, so that you could wake up on a Saturday and find the day already yours. The people who won it didn't just ask nicely. They had to break a system that was designed to break them first. In one of my videos, titled, Why You Are Always Busy, I talked about how your time was stolen. The link is at the top of the screen now. This is the other half. This is the story of how the time we enjoy now was won back. This video leans more into history than philosophy or psychology, so sit tight and watch to the end. Let's start with what that world actually looked like, because it is worse than you can imagine. In the factories of the 19th century, the working day had no ceiling. 10 hours, 12, 14, 6 days a week for $1 or $2. The factory drained every waking second it could from you because there was no law and no force stopping it. When you came of age, you went to the machine and you stayed there until your body gave out. Rest was not a right. It was theft from your employer. And into that, a demand began to form, simple, almost modest. 8 hours. The slogan that carried it is one of the most quietly radical things ever put into words. Workers sang it in the streets from the 1860s onward. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. The stress is on the last part. 8 hours for what we will. Not 8 hours for more rest so you can work harder. 8 hours that belong to you for whatever you choose. Your family, your own life. The demand was for more than less labor. It was for the radical idea that a worker's time could be their own at all. A single worker asking for shorter days could simply be fired and replaced by morning. But all of them at once, walking out together, that could not be replaced. An empty factory earns nothing. A silent mill bleeds money by the hour. The strike was the whole mechanism. Workers discovered that their labor, withheld together, was the only language an employer could not ignore. One man's request was nothing. 10,000 men laying down their tools on the same morning was a force. And there was an early, unenforced promise to build on. Laws had been passed as far back as the 1860s declaring 8 hours a legal day. In Illinois, for federal workers. But they were dead letters, ignored because no one made employers obey them. The law existed on paper. What was missing was the pressure to make it real. So the movement set out to supply that pressure all at once on a single day. In 1884, a federation of trade unions set a deadline. By the 1st of May, 1886, the working day would be 8 hours. Not because anyone had granted it, because they would take it. What happened next is the part the comfortable version of history leaves out. On the 1st of May, 1886, hundreds of thousands of workers across America walked off the job at once. In Chicago, the center of it, the streets filled. For 2 days, the city held. Then, on the 3rd of May, at the McCormick plant, police opened fire on striking workers and killed several of them. The next evening, the 4th of May, workers gathered in Haymarket Square to protest the killings. It was peaceful and winding down in the rain when police moved in to break it up. Someone, to this day no one knows who, threw a bomb. In the chaos that followed, gunfire broke out. Police and workers died. What came after was a warning dressed as a trial. 8 men, labor organizers, were rounded up, not for throwing the bomb, which none of them was shown to have done, but for the ideas they held. 7 were sentenced to death. The newspapers cheered. The message to every worker in the country was unmistakable. Ask for your time, and this is what waits for you. They were meant to be forgotten as criminals. Instead, the world remembered them as something else. The 1st of May, May Day, is still marked across the earth as the day workers claim their hours, named for what happened in that square. The men who were hanged to crush the movement became the reason it could not be crushed. The 8-hour day did not arrive that year. It would take 50 more. But the fight had a date now, and a memory, and the dead to answer to. The fight for the 8-hour day proved that time could be contested in the streets. But while the workday was being capped, another battle was brewing, a fight for the days themselves. Let's get into why we have Saturdays and Sundays as free days. Here's a fact that should change how you see your Saturday. The weekend was not invented by a kind boss. It was assembled piece by people pushing against everything. The first crack came in 1908, in a New England cotton mill where Jewish workers needed Saturday for the Sabbath and Christians kept Sunday, so the mill for once gave both. 2 days. It was rare and it was local and almost nowhere else allowed it. Then, in 1926, the most famous name in the story, Henry Ford shut his factories for all of Saturday and Sunday and kept his workers' pay the same. And Ford is where most people stop. The industrialist who gave us the weekend. But that is the convenient version of the history which we are often told, and it is an insult to the people who actually bled for it. Ford did not invent the idea. He arrived at the end of it. For 60 years before him, unions had been fighting and losing and fighting again for shorter hours. Workers had been beaten in the streets, fired for organizing, blacklisted so they could never work again, jailed and killed for asking for exactly what Ford would later be praised for granting. He gave, from a position of safety, what others had bled to make thinkable. In 1929, it was a union, the Amalgamated Clothing Workers, that became the first to force a 5-day week through demand, rather than receive it as a gift. And even then, it was not law. It became law in 1938, in the depths of the Depression, when the Fair Labor Standards Act finally capped the working week and made the weekend something an employer could no longer simply take back. Not granted. Legislated, after half a century of pressure from below. Your 2 days were a 50-year campaign. You inherited them as if they were always there. For most of the industrial age, children were not children. They were workers, the same as their fathers and their mothers. In 1900, at least 1 in 20 American workers was a child. They were not teenagers with a summer job. No. They were children of 5, 6, 7 years old in the cotton mills and the coal mines and the canneries. Many were boys so small they had to climb onto the spinning frames to reach the broken threads. Children in the coal breakers, bent over the chutes, picking rock out of coal with bleeding fingers in the dust. Girls shucking oysters from 3 in the morning. They worked the same 12 and 14 hours a day, same as the adults, but for a fraction of the pay the adults received because they were easier to control and too small to refuse. How does something this monstrous become so ordinary that almost no one questions it? Employers argued it built character in parents who needed the wage agreed, and the country, on the whole, looked away. What changed it was, in part, a man with a camera. In 1908, a schoolteacher named Lewis Hine left his job and went to work for a committee trying to end child labor. He traveled the country with a heavy camera, talking his way into the mills and mines disguised as a salesman or an inspector. And he photographed the children, their faces, their bare feet, their hands in the machines. He wrote down their names and their ages, so no one could pretend they were not real. And there was no technology then to let anyone wave the pictures away as fakes. And the photographs did what the arguments alone could not. A country that could ignore a statistic could not ignore the face of a 5-year-old in a coal mine. The images moved through newspapers and hearings and finally into law. It was slow, and it was resisted. An early child labor law was passed in 1916 and struck down by the Supreme Court 2 years later. But the same 1938 act that gave you the weekend also set a minimum age for work. The children came out of the mills because people refused to let the country keep looking away. You did not spend your childhood in a factory. That too was one. The 8-hour day was not a gift. It was a demand, sung in the streets for decades before it became real, paid for in Chicago with the lives of men who were hanged for asking. The weekend was not invented by an industrialist. It was the end of a 50-year fight, fought by workers who were beaten and fired and blacklisted, and finally written into law long after the first of them had given up everything for it. And the freedom of a child to be a child instead of a laborer was not the natural progress of a decent society. It was forced on a country that profited from looking away, by reformers and unions and one man's photographs of faces no one was supposed to see. Here is what all of it has in common. Every hour of your rest was once someone else's battle. The time that feels most ordinary to you, the lazy Saturday, the evening that belongs to no employer, the childhood spent in a classroom, each of it was taken, against resistance, from people who were told they were asking for too much. That is the part worth remembering. Not that your time was stolen, you already knew that, but that it can be taken back, because it already was, once by people no more powerful than you. They had no wealth and no titles and no permission. What they had was each other, and the refusal to accept that exhaustion was simply the price of being alive. So when this weekend comes, and the day is yours, remember it was not always yours, and it was not freely given. Ordinary people moved an immovable system to put that day in your hands. The hours you rest in are the proof that it can be done.